Hello, everyone, and welcome to another of our virtual events with Youth Early Our Child Rescue. And tonight we've got a really, really incredible evening lined up for you, so I'm very excited about that. I'm the Chief Executive of Youth Early Our Child Rescue. Most of you should have heard about us by now, I hope. We support at-risk children in Israel and give them the opportunities that we would like for our own children and that we've been afforded for ourselves throughout our lives to have opportunities to be the best that you can be. We help children who've come from really, really difficult circumstances and who are seizing these opportunities and really changing their worlds and then changing the worlds of the peers that they've grown up with, children in their own neighborhoods who finally have a role model to look up to who they can identify with. So it's changing their lives as well as changing their siblings' lives, and it's changing society as more people become productive members of society rather than being recipients of welfare and charity going forward, and that then influences future generations. So the gifts that you give to our charity have a far broader impact than just simply changing the life of one individual child, although that in and of itself is quite an amazing thing to be able to do. Let's get stuck into our evening, but know that your support is going towards that. And in the meantime, you get to have fun and meet some interesting people. So to just fill you in on how the format works, as this is a webinar format, we can't see you. You'll be able to see us. You do have the option to ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box, which you can find by hovering your mouse or if you're on a tablet or phone, your finger by tapping the screen. And at the bottom of the screen, out there, you should see Q&A, and you can click on that and you can type in any questions you may have. You can do that at any point during the interview. It won't interrupt anything. And at the end, I will read your questions out. If you want them to be read with your name, that's fine. You can leave your name there. If you'd rather remain anonymous, you can just note that in your question, and that's absolutely fine. We are recording this evening, and it will go up on our website at some point. So bear that in mind when you're choosing whether or not you want to have your name read out. So that is it from us. I will not take up any more of your time because I know we're excited to get started. We're going to introduce again our lovely, lovely host for the evening, Maurice Selwyn, who has done an incredible job along with the events committee in setting up all of these virtual events that have kept us going through assorted lockdowns and, you know, not quite lockdowns, but not quite going out period of life that we seem to be a little bit stuck in at the moment. So Maurice, you're amazing. Thank you. Come on to the screen and let's see your smiling face. I will see you later. Have fun.
We will. Well, thank you, Dalia. Thank you so much. Good evening, one and all. Tonight, my guest is truly a household name, a face that everyone knows and a voice that reflects serenity and calm. With a career spanning over 5 decades, he is perhaps best known for his gardening expertise. But as we will hear, it is in fact a diverse and storied career. A previous TV and radio gardening icon who was named Percy Thrower used to say, "The answer lies in the soil." But I think the answers are here tonight as we meet the wonderful Alan Titchmarsh, MBE.
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm here.
Great to see you.
And you, Morris.
Alan, firstly, may I say, on a personal level, how delighted I am to be sitting in the chair talking with you tonight.
You're very kind, thank you.
Your career is incredibly interesting. And as I said in my introduction, everyone immediately recognizes your name and face, particularly in relation to the world of gardening. But there's a great deal more about you that may be less well known. So let's find out about the real Alan Titchmarsh. Tell us where you were born and a little bit about your childhood.
I was born in Ilkley in the West Riding of Yorkshire in Wharfdale, which is a lovely place to grow up. Moors above you, river valley below you, fields, woodland. The good grounding for someone who was interested in countryside and grew up to be a naturalist and a gardener. My dad was a plumber and my mum was a housewife. I have a sister she says 5 years younger than me. I know it's actually 4.5. And we grew up there, and I didn't leave until I was about 20 when I came down to college and Kew Gardens. So I grew up, my formative 20 years were all in Yorkshire. And I just loved gardening. I failed my 11 plus, so I went to secondary school. I was in the A stream, which is my only saving grace. But I loved gardening. I wasn't really an academic. I like to think I'm a late developer. I'm still waiting. But I knew I wanted to grow things. I just liked being outside. I'm still a member of the Wharfdale Naturalist Society, which I joined at the age of 8. But I love growing things. I love being outside, and it struck me that that's what I wanted to do for a living. So I asked my parents if I could leave school at 15, which is, what? What about your GCEs? Your O levels and then your A levels. I didn't want any of that. So they very kindly let me leave at 15 with 1 O level. I took a year early in art. So I left school at 15 with 1 O level in art and went to work as an apprentice in the local Parks Department nursery. And that was my start in life, really.
You obviously developed the bug for this line of work, which led you to go on to study horticulture and agriculture.
Well, it was mainly horticulture. The college was agriculture and horticulture, but it was all kinds of horticulture. I had to learn how to do a 3-point linkage in order to fasten a plough to the back of a tractor. That was about as near as I got to agriculture. But it was at Oaklands College in Hertfordshire, which is where I did my year for my national certificate in horticulture full time. First time I'd left home, a little bit scary. I did cultivation under glass, orchards, fruit and market gardening, all that kind of thing, and amenity horticulture, which is where I felt I was headed to. I've always liked beauty in a garden, and I knew I was destined for ornamental horticulture rather than commercial horticulture, as it's called. But this college was great in that, rather like the Parks Department, which gave me a grounding in growing absolutely everything, the college itself covered all kinds of subjects. So I felt I'd got a good rounded education there, and then was lucky enough to get accepted on the diploma course at Kew Gardens. So I spent the 3 years after that full-time working and learning on the student course at Kew, which was wonderful experience in the Palm House. And
I think we got a shot of a very young Alan Titchmarsh here.
Really?
Yes, I think we have.
Oh my goodness! Well, that's after that was married by then. That, believe it or not, I was about 30. That is not a hat I'm wearing. That was my hair.
Okay. That's no connection to being a Queen's Park Rangers supporter then?
No, not at all. It was just a rugby shirt I happened to have, and up until then, gardeners and wore waistcoats and ties.
Okay.
Terribly
well, you've mentioned one of my favourite tranquil places in London, which is a place you spent quite a bit of time, and you've already said was part of your informative years.
Mm.
Do you remember planting those?
I didn't plant those, but I worked in that greenhouse there, the Palm House, designed by Decimus Burton. I worked in there for a year. And that right-hand end that you can see there,
yeah.
There's the big dome in the middle, and then the right-hand leg that comes out. That was the end where all the cycads were grown. And I was in there for a year, and I encountered there one of the rarest plants in the world, which is something called Encephalatos woodii, which had been collected in the 18th century. And there are only 3 plants of its kind in cultivation in the world. And they said, you're in charge of this. And I was for a year. I said, don't kill it. There aren't many left. I've never been so glad to see the plant still growing at the end of the year, knowing that I hadn't been responsible for its demise. Yeah.
I think whenever I go there, and it's open, that is, the place I love most of all is the Lilly House, which is just virtually opposite that building.
Yeah, the tropical water lily house. It's wonderful. You can go in there, can't you? Morris? You can pretend you're in the jungle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a glorious place to be. It was, I mean, to grow up and to, well, let's say grow. I wasn't still growing up. I was only in my early 20s, and they are the most formative years of your life, the most influential years. And to
Well,
grow
I'll tell
up,
you when I get there.
it's the most, the best botanic garden in the world with the widest range of plants. And it was just a delight, and I still, thank my lucky stars that I was allowed to train there. And then I taught there for 2 years after that, which is quite fun, setting up staff training courses. So I'm definitely a QIte, as we're called. Yeah.
Well, we're members. I mean, we go whenever we can, so several times a year. But when you left Kew, you became an assistant editor at Hamlin's, where you wrote your first book. I believe it was called Gardening Undercover.
It was. I did a little paperback for a magazine called Wedding Day and First Home, and it was on houseplants. It's a little paperback. But then, yes, Gardening Undercover, which has nothing to do with James Bond, though it'd be nice to think that it was, wouldn't it, really? Gardening in greenhouses, cold frames, cloches, things like that. So yes, and my wife took the jacket photograph, which was me gazing rather winsomely at, I think, probably a potted geranium in my hand. So yeah, that was my foray into journalism, and I've just written my 71st book. So there's no stopping me now, really. I love writing. It's a chance to express yourself, whether it's writing non-fiction, gardening books, or books about royal gardens or whatever.
We're going to come on a bit more to your.
I'm jumping ahead, aren't I? Racing
you are a
through
little
the career
bit
too rapidly. Sorry.
After 5 years editing gardening books and magazines, I think you took the bull by the horns, literally, and became a freelance writer. Because I know you've said 71, but I was going to say you've written more than 50 gardening books, 3 volumes of autobiography, several books on royalty, 10 novels, 10 novels that have made the Sunday Times bestseller list.
Yeah, and one other. So yeah, number 12 comes out in March. So yeah, you're right with numbers.
Okay, well, close to being right then.
Yeah.
What made you start writing fiction, and what was the first novel that you wrote?
I got sort of going on non-fiction, on gardening books and whatnot, and loved just writing. I used to love writing at school. It was one of the few things I really enjoyed. Not that I had a particularly encouraging English teacher. However, I did like writing. I found it was an outlet. And having written so many gardening books, the one thing you're not allowed to do as a grown-up, unless you're an artist or a novelist, I'm trying to think of other words, is use your imagination. Let it go. And I thought, I wonder if I could write a novel. So I had an idea for a novel. I thought this could come out when I'd started doing radio and television. I thought, okay, they always say write about what you know about. So I wrote a novel called Mr. McGregor, which was about a TV gardener from Yorkshire. Spot the sort of similarities. And I wrote a couple of chapters and sent it off to 3 publishers, thinking I'll give it to, I don't know whether I can do this or not, or whether they think it's rubbish. And I sent it off, and I got a rejection slip from one and a request to see more from the second. And the third one invited me to lunch. So I want you to guess, Maurice, which one I went with. Well, I went to lunch, and it was spotted this, because I'd sent it in under my own name. I didn't have an agent. And I would say to anybody who wants to write, get an agent, because unless you get an agent, it goes into a publisher, it goes onto something called unsolicited manuscripts, go onto something called the slush pile, and that really rather says everything, doesn't it? They don't have to read them. They can just put them in a brown paper envelope and send them back. Well, somebody spotted my name on this and read it and said to this editor, actually, this isn't bad, or words to that effect. And that was the editor who rang me up and said, come and see me for lunch. That was in the book was published in 1998. So that was probably in about 1997. And today, the man who spotted my book is actually my literary editor. I spoke to him only an hour ago on the telephone. He's become a great pal. He broke away from editing and became an agent. And he said, well, I'm going to be an agent now. So I said, well, you're going to take me with you, aren't you? Because you've been so encouraging. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have written fiction. So that was the first one. And yeah, number 12 comes out in March. Yeah.
I mean, do you have a favorite book, either one of your own or literally a favorite book?
Well, Wind in the Willows I've always loved because it's just such a beautiful story, and I got to play the part of Kenneth Graham, the narrator, in the Vaudeville Theatre in gosh, is it that long ago? 2014. It's a long time ago now. And so I did my stint in the West End for 3 months, which is kind of wow. So I've always loved that. There's something about Wind in the Willows because it's involved with countryside and it's still fictional. And there's wonderful characters. We all know a mole. We all know a ratty. We all know a toad. We all know a badger. You know, they're rather like Winnie the Pooh in that, you know, Piglet, Tigger, Pooh. They're characters. They're people we know. But I've always loved Wind in the Willows from that point of view. It was always special. So that is very of my own. I did one called My Secret Garden, which is about the garden here where I am in Hampshire. And I love that as a kind of record of how that garden was 6 or 7 years ago is now when I wrote it. But I think it's always the next book that you write, the novel that you're writing that becomes your favorite. You sort of, the others go and take their place in your little universe, you know, and you hope that people like them. But what is lovely, I mean, I was somewhere the other day and a lady came up to me and she had a couple of my books to sign and she said, "When's The Gift coming out?" which is the title of the next novel, which is out on the 3rd of March, I think. And she knew more about it than I did. And that's wonderfully rewarding when you have a follower. I write stories. I don't make any great pretense to the fact. I hope they're reasonably well written, but you know, they're not esoteric or cerebral or they're provocative, I hope. But I like to read books that take me on use that dreadful word, journey, but they take me out of myself and I can lose myself in a book. And I'm interested in the characters, whether I like them or loathe them. I want to see what happens to them. That's always key. I remember Joanna Trollope saying, "I don't patronize my readers with a happy ending." And I thought, well, no, maybe not, but you have to give them a satisfactory ending, whether or not it's happy. They've got to feel they've not got to feel shortchanged. And I don't plot, which is a bit dangerous, but I've learned over the space of writing 12 novels now, that's not how I work. I get characters in my head. I get a kind of a rough scenario, but it's very rough, just as kind of state of affairs really, and a location. And my characters do sort of cook a bit. And then I put them in a situation and I see what happens. And I write down what happens.
I was just thinking that something that you said just now, you referred to Wind in the Willows and you said everybody knows a mole. Well, I just hope that if any of our audience tonight actually working for MI5, that you say you don't actually know a mole.
Oh, I don't know. Well, you don't know if you know a mole, do you? Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there a special place where you get inspiration for your writing?
I get inspiration. I think I'm never quite sure where it comes from. People say, "Where do you get your ideas from?" You say, "Oh, I've got a cupboard and it's what." No, I don't know. They just sort of drift in from somewhere. And I do get some of them when I'm out in the garden. But this is where I'm sitting now. It's a barn. You can see the roof of it now. It's a barn. The house is just about 20 yards across there. So I walk across a sort of terrace to get to this barn. So this is where I write. I'm talking to you on the laptop that I write at. I was just saying to somebody today when our Sky dish went wrong, and I've had this laptop for about 3 years now. And you know what it's like. It's going to start getting a bit iffy soon. And they say, "Oh, it's vintage, that one." And I still have the typewriter I bought to type my first articles on. I always call them articles, columns. I still have that, and that will see me through, and you know, it'll see me out. And we all think this is a wonderful development, and it is, because editing is so much easier on a laptop. But the fact that they build in this thing about they only last for X years, cool. We're all being led up the garden path, aren't we?
When did you last change the ribbon then on your typewriter?
Yeah, I haven't checked it to see if the ribbon will no doubt have dried out. I mean, it is actually black and chrome. It's that old. And I wrote my student thesis at Kew Gardens on it. So it's that old. But there's a lovely progression. It's rather like the cars you had. You know, my first car was a Mini, and then I went on, and so it went on. But I remember this sort of clack, clack, clack typewriter. Then I got an electric typewriter where if you left your finger on the key for too long, it went zzz, and there was all one letter. So you had to learn to touch it more lightly. And then I got one which had a little screen which did one line of, do you remember? And you could see the letters coming on it.
Was that the IBM golf ball? That used to do something like that.
Oh, it wasn't as flash as a golf ball, but it did have them all coming up, but on the electronic one. And then, of course, we had these big screens that were green again. And now, you know, baby, look at us now. It's been astonishing, actually, looking at it. I'd love to go to a museum and just see side by side my writing machines as they were.
Yeah.
You know, I've got the first one, but I've got all the ones in between.
The Science Museum, I think, or the Design Museum in Kensington actually has a whole array of things like that.
Well, that's great, especially if they've done them chronologically. It just reminds you about, oh, we had one of those. You know.
Well, moving on from literature, you made your first appearance on BBC Nationwide, I believe in 1979. But your first big break into the world of TV started with this magazine program. It was indeed Pebble Mill. I think it was called Pebble Mill at 1.
Well, no, the one before I joined it was called Pebble Mill at 1.
Okay.
And that disappeared, and then daytime television started. And I did, in fact, I started, as you said, on Nationwide, absolutely right. I then moved on to Breakfast Time when it was Sofas, Red Sofas with Selena Scott and Frank Boff. And then while I was doing that, they decided that, I don't remember, television used to finish after breakfast time. There was a gap until lunchtime. And then they decided in 1986 that they wanted daytime television right the way through the day. And that's when I was invited to do a program called Open Air, which was a sort of an hour and a half viewers feedback program. And then from Pebble Mill, Daytime Live came out the year after that in 1987. And I did that for 10 years to 1996. And that's when it was the boss of Daytime TV said to me, have you thought of doing anything other than gardening on the box? And I said, well, no, not really. And he said, well, you should audition for this program. So I auditioned for Open Air. Then after a year of that, I moved across to Birmingham from Manchester and did Daytime Live, which became Pebble Mill, which was interviewing and being a chat show host. And I suddenly found what I loved doing, which was talking to people, interviewing them, rather than what you're doing to me and just hearing myself droning on.
Did you find that challenging to start with?
It's still challenging. I mean, I do this program on a Sunday morning now called Love Your Weekend.
We'll talk about that
later on. Yeah, but interviewing itself, I love interviewing. I'm not bothered if the camera looks at me or not. I just want to present people to the audience, to engage the audience. You know, if you ever interview anybody famous, people always say to you, what's X really like? Well, I regard my role as an interviewer as showing them what X is really like. I remember interviewing Joan Collins and saying, I'd interviewed her once already. And I said, my friend said, this is a bit cheeky really to say to Joan Collins. I said, my friends say to me, what's she like close to? And she said, well, and I said, oh, pretty good actually. So, and that's it, I think, really. You just want to allow your guests, for good or ill, to show themselves to your audience, really, and to ask the questions that your audience wants to ask.
Well, next you hosted another long-running BBC series, Gardener's World. What was particularly special about this series?
Well, I grew up, as we'd said, in Ilkley, watching Percy Thrower, as you said. And I remember saying to my mate across the road who wanted to be a postman, we were both keen on gardening. He said, if you're a postman, you can finish work at about 11 o'clock and then go home and be a gardener. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I want to be Percy Thrower, because he was on Gardening Club, as it was then. And he laughed like a drain and said, that's ridiculous. There's only one of them. Careful what you wish for. So to actually get to the stage where I presented Gardener's World, Jeff Hamilton was a friend, and Jeff had presented, I think, for about 16 years. Funnily enough, we were both auditioned for it at the same time. So I could have presented Gardener's World 16 years earlier. I'm glad I didn't, because it allowed me to do all kinds of other things before I did it. So I always accept the fickle finger of fate and go where life nudges me. I'm a great believer in spotting opportunities, taking risks, but at the same time not beating your head against a door that doesn't want to open, but seeing other ones that are open and thinking, oh, go in there and have a look at that. So, you know, I wouldn't have done Breakfast Time. I wouldn't have done Pebble Mill. I wouldn't have done Songs of Praise, all kinds of things, if I'd done Gardener's World when I auditioned. And the reason they told me I didn't get it, and Jeff did, though it's probably because he was better, was the fact that my garden was in the south and Jeff's was in Rutland in the Midlands, which they felt was more applicable to the wider audience in the UK. Whatever the reason, Jeff was a mate anyway, because when I was deputy editor of Amateur Gardening, Jeff was editor of Practical Gardening magazine. And he was a great friend. We used to see each other on press dues at seed merchants and things like that. And when I was working for Amateur Gardening, I got married, and I was a bit short of cash because we'd just taken on a mortgage for this tiny house. So as deputy editor, assistant, and then deputy editor of Amateur Gardening, I was working hard. And Jeff said, well, why don't you write some columns for me on Practical Gardening? So I said, I can't do that because I'm deputy editor of Amateur Gardening. That's the rival. He said, well, you could write for me under a pseudonym. So in fact, I did one or two articles for Jeff under a pseudonym of Tom Derwent. And I remember him ringing up Alison, my wife, one evening and saying, can I speak to Tom Derwent? And Alison was convinced it was the tax man. And so, not that we were doing anything remotely unbound. And then Jeff admitted it was him ringing me up. But he was a great pal. So I took over Gardener's World, which was a wonderful thing to do in terms of history. I was its presenter for 6-7 years. And always wanted to be Percy Thrower. Suddenly I was Percy Thrower. But in sad circumstances, because Jeff and I had a conversation. He wanted to leave. He'd done it for 16 years. And he said, when do you want to take over? And I said, well, when do you want to stop? And this was in June at Gardener's World Live. I said, you tell me when you want to stop and I'll take over. He said, what if I stop next Easter and you can pick up the reins next Easter? So I said, fine, we'll do that. And then he died of a heart attack that August, which was terribly. I was out in South Africa leading a tour. And I remember being rung up. And of course, the time difference isn't much. So there was no sort of jet lag, nothing. But I was speaking to newspapers right the way through midnight for deadlines about Jeff and how wonderful he was. And then I was rung up and they said, we want you to take over now. I had to come back early from South Africa to record the next program. And that was really difficult, finishing that season from August through to October. It was about 8 weeks I think I had to do. And I thought, I'll just mind man the fort, as it were, just keep it going till the end. And then the following year in February, March, I took it on as me, that was my kind of legitimate run. And I had a letter that spring in that March from a man who said, when you took over from Jeff Hamilton on Gardener's World, my heart sank. I've been watching you over the last few weeks. ... You'll do. And I thought, because you can't be somebody else. You can only be yourself. And not everybody's going to like you. And, people who love Jeff, I wouldn't have been to everybody's taste. And it's the same with all gardeners, really, whoever you are. Some people prefer this one, some prefer that one. But it's doing something which I believe passionately in, and that is, it's the sharp end of conservation and environmental care gardening. It's the bit outside your door. And we all worry about these enormous, great environmental problems and global warming and climate change. It starts there on your doorstep. And if you think government should be doing this, well, you do something with your tiny patch. Doesn't matter how big. It matters how you run it, that you don't use peat, that you don't use chemicals, that you are organic, that you recycle your compost. It seems quite feeble, but if everybody did that, the problem would be sorted. And I feel it needs to be done. We all need to do it,
Well, one of your earlier successes, which took gardening to the masses, was the program Ground Force. And we've got a picture here.
Look at that, what a young lad with Charlie and Tommy.
Interesting, of course, you had Charlie on your show on Sunday.
I did. I mean, it's the first, and that's the first time we've broadcast together since Ground Force. So that was really rather nice.
This program was possibly one of the first makeover programs that are now so popular.
It was the first garden makeover program. I mean, Changing Rooms was doing it to houses, but we actually did it to gardens.
Absolutely.
And if you think about it, Maurice, I mean, gardening is makeover. That's what we do. Absolutely. We make over a piece of land. And, there are people who are a bit sort of disparaging about makeovers. Well, that's what gardening is. What you might be disparaging about is the speed with which we did it. But we made good gardens. We didn't take shortcuts. We planted things properly where they would grow, enrich the soil. Just that we had to do it faster than most people do.
Yeah.
And it did. It was an astonishing success. I mean, we had Our best ever program was 12 million viewers. We were second only in the days when soap operas were, you know, getting 20 million or so. We were second only to EastEnders on the BBC ratings. And we took gardening onto BBC One, which is the first time. It had always been in that little Friday night slot on BBC Two. They still think of BBC Two as a more minority, less mainstream than BBC One, which I always think is really rather a throwback, because frankly, I don't think half of us know which channel we're watching now. We just look down that list on the satellite thing and see what we fancy. And if somebody said to you, what was it on? You often don't know. And I do think they get a bit hung up on
They just say the TV.
Yeah, exactly. But it was
that
lovely
series. That series was so popular that you travelled to the United States and you went to South Africa because you did a makeover in the garden of a world leader.
We did. What a special time that was, Nelson Mandela. Yeah.
I mean, tell us about his garden. What did you actually do for Mandela?
It was for the millennium, so it was in the year 2000, and we were asked if who would like to make a garden for the millennium. So the Queen Mother was going to be 100, but I thought, well, she's got quite a lot of gardens anyway. So I said, well, love to make a garden for Nelson Mandela, and they laughed, you know. Anyway, they did research and found somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, knew a man called Ahmed Kathrada, who had been in prison with him on Robben Island. Right. And Ahmed Kathrada went to Mrs. Mandela, it was Gracia Michelle, and put this idea to her. And I remember ringing up Gracia Michelle from my shed, trying to convince her, it wasn't working hard, but explaining to her what we would like to do for Mr. Mandela. And she just kept saying, and I thought, oh, crumbs, I'm going down by a tool here. And I got to the end and I said, well, that's what we'd like to do. And she said, I think it sounds wonderful. So I suddenly realized that we were there. We were going to make a garden for Nelson Mandela. So we went out to South Africa. I went on to Robben Island. I saw the beach where he'd harvested seaweeds, the lime quarry where he'd had to break rock, and then the prison yard where he'd been exercised. And then they gave me the key to his cell, and I let myself into his cell, which is quite emotional. 8 foot square, grey gloss painted box with a bucket and a blanket in a corner, knowing that he'd spent the better part of 27 years living in there. And then we went off to Kunu in the Transkei, which is where he had a new house built. And there was no garden there. There was a little bit of land around the house, and we made a garden for him. And we normally had 2 days to make it. When we did specials like that, which we had 3 days, which is great. And I said, could you get him back, please, on the third day at 5 o'clock? And they said, well, at the moment he's in the United States talking to President Clinton. And I thought, put me in my place. You know, well, 5 o'clock on day 3, the motorcade came down the hillside. And we were hiding around the back of the house. Our hearts were all thumping. And he came round the back of the house and he looked at me and said, hello. And I said, hello, sir. And he turned and looked at his garden and said, gee whiz. And I thought it was a wonderful boy's own paper thing to say. And he was just charming, the most powerful, quiet charisma that I've ever encountered, second only to the Queen. I mean, they both have. And it's not just the fact that you know who they are, it's how they wear their character, their power, their responsibility, or their persona. And like the Queen, he had this enormous, great charisma, quiet charisma. And we were told that he wouldn't sign anything because he was, you know, he didn't sign things anymore. It was just too much to ask. And there'd be no interviews. We were just giving him the garden. And then he said, shall we sit down and chat? So I said, that would be lovely. So I sat down and interviewed him for half an hour, which I don't think the British press have ever forgiven me for. There were so many clamouring to get interviews with him at that time in 2000. And this gardener opted out to South Africa, made a garden for him and sat down and had the temerity to interview him for half an hour. And he was absolutely charming. I had done quite a bit of interviewing by then. So although I was not what you might call a heavyweight, I was still an interviewer. And he explained to me how important plants had been to him. He said, when I was in prison in Robben Island, there were only 2 things I had any control over, and they were 2 tomato plants. And I grew them in the corner of the prison yard. And one of them took sick, and I tried everything to get to come back to life. I watered it or stopped watering it and I did everything. He said it wouldn't, it died. He said, and I dug it up and I took it to the other corner of the prison yard and I gave it a burial. He said, so perhaps that will let you know how important plants were and are to me. And he looked around to his garden and he said, I'll look after this for as long as I possibly can. And I thought, that's wonderful. And I remember asking him why he wasn't bitter after 27 years of being shut away. And he said, there's no time. There's too much to do. I shall never forget that. I have in my sitting room a photograph of me and him laughing together. And I do treasure it. I mean, I've been so fortunate in my life to have met so many amazing people, from the Queen and the Prince of Wales to Nelson Mandela, and, you know, this little lad from Yorkshire who was an apprentice in the Parks Department. And I still feel that I'm a bit of a Bistow kid, really, thinking, crumbs, how have I got away with this, you know?
Well, over the years, I mean, you've presented a multitude of other TV programs, and really there's too many to name. But you're probably best known for the Chelsea Flower Show, the Proms, the Alan Titchmarsh Chat Show, which ran, I believe, for 8 years. And currently we've got Love Your Weekend and Love Your Garden.
Mm.
I mean, I'm just saying that, you know, your latest series is just fantastic. I mean, can I just ask you though, on the Love Your Garden, it's about transforming gardens of people who deserve it.
Mm.
I think that's the terminology you use.
Yeah, well, it is. It's slightly different to Ground Force in that it's still a makeover. But Ground Force is for people who wrote in who were interesting characters and might have had a bit of a story now. But this is for people whose lives will be changed by having a garden, whether they're amputees who, you know, lost limbs in Afghanistan or whatever, or whether they're people who've been bereaved or are old and used to love gardening and now can't get out there. All kinds of people whose life will be changed. And I know they're changed because of the reaction we get and the feedback we get from them when we leave them with a garden. And it's just part of, they're applicable to everybody because people can see what we do. So there's lots of gardening content in them and information. But also at their heart is somebody's personality, somebody's life, which is improved. And I think that's an enormously privileged thing to be able to do. But also at the same time, it enables me, us, Katie and Francis and David and myself, to show what gardens can do and to keep banging on about it. But it does. And I feel passionately that gardens are food for the soul as well as the stomach. And Love Your Garden enables us to do that and has wonderfully moving stories of triumph in adversity as well.
Does everybody have virtually the same budget for you to work with?
We're very lucky. We get a lot of things given. I don't know what the budget for the show is, but we get a lot of, you know, lots of firms give garden buildings or give us a reduction in plants. They're part of the production cost. We don't charge the people we do them for anything. They get a garden.
Yeah.
There it is, it's yours. We don't take anything out when we go away. It's left. They all say, I've got to look at it. Don't worry, you can ring whenever you want.
It's not going back on eBay tomorrow.
No, not unless they put it on eBay. No.
Yeah.
No.
Do you think that that the lockdown has brought an increased awareness and interest in gardening?
I do, and I hope it sticks. You know, I hope it stays. I hope people have realised over the past 2 years what a garden can do for you spiritually. There's been a lot of talk, and rightly so, about mental health and the detrimental effect on mental health of lockdown, and not being able to see older people who are in care that you can't get to, you can see through a window. You know, we had grandchildren that we could only wave to across their garden gate. It's heartbreaking for all of us, to a greater or lesser extent. And our gardens were a great solace. And people who'd only thought of them as something to either tidy or go and sit in when the sun shone, maybe we've got a bit further down the road of saying this is more than that. This is your piece of earth. There's something very special about it. And I've always espoused that I want gardening to remain magical because it still is for me, but I want to take away the mystery of how you do it. It's very straightforward, really. Just give plants want to grow, and it's up to us not to get in the way, but to give them what they want. What's
your view on talking to plants?
If you talk to them, you notice them, you look at them while you're talking to them, you know, oh, you look a bit, Oh, look, you're dry. I'll give you some water. I don't disparage people who talk to plants. I talk to them myself. I mean, it's often with a word of warning. You don't buck up.
Yeah.
That
No,
conference keep over there,
yeah.
So, yeah, no, I don't mind that. I mean, sometimes you get better conversation than you get from people.
Well, on the series of I Love Your Weekend, I love the show. I mean, you've interviewed personalities as diverse as the Duchess of York, Catherine Jenkins, Rob Brydon. This week in particular, you mentioned you had Charlie on there. There was two things I want to talk about this week because I love that feature on the tractors. I really, really loved it. The story of the guy with his grandson who had the tractor in 1941, I believe it was.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say some people may not have seen the story, but can you just very briefly tell them about how he got that tractor? Because that's fascinating.
Let me recap a little bit on Love Your Weekend. I'd noticed that on Sunday mornings, it was either politics or cooking. And by Sunday, I've had enough politics. It's been going on all week. And I love eating, and my wife is a brilliant cook, but I don't particularly want to watch cookery programs. I thought, I can't be on my own here. I'd love a program on a Sunday morning, which is based in the countryside, about the countryside, the people in it, with a couple of celebs who are maybe interested in countryside or whatever. Just a sort of fun program, an interesting program that covers all aspects of countryside, livestock, animals, plants, all kinds of things, and interesting people, interesting celebrities. You mentioned some of them. So we devised Love Your Weekend, and we have shepherds on. I mean, this week I've been recording this week, and I've had in one day I had sheep, pigs, dogs, and goats. I mean, and for different programs. And we talk about them realistically. I'll talk about what age are these sheep when they go to market. And if you're a bit squeamish, well, those sheep wouldn't be there unless they went to market or whatever. So it's not a harsh program. It's a realistic program about the countryside, everything in it. Leslie Joseph does Bird of the Week at the moment. In the new year, she's going to be doing Fruit of the Week, where she does a wonderful voiceover. We have a little section called Ode to Joy, which is just film footage to music, no commentary, of all different parts of the countryside, or a steam train or something like that. And you can just watch it. It's what they call slow television. We have another section called Walk on the Wild Side, which is viewers' photographs of what they can see from their windows to music. And it sets me up for a Sunday morning. It's on, it's 2 hours long. You don't have to watch everything, but it's on. You can tune in and tune out when you want to. And so we get lots of people on who work in the countryside, including these three guys who were collectors of tractors, as you say. And the first one, as you say, the grandfather and his grandson there. Well, the grandfather was a boy when they acquired this tractor, which you got by a kind of lottery. During the war, tractors were in short supply, but if you put your name in a hat and your name came out, you were given a tractor. And this little lad, as he was now grandfather, discovered that their name had come out. That he said to his dad, Dad, we're getting a tractor. And he's trying to do it ridiculous. They got a tractor. Well, the grandfather and the now grandson brought this tractor with them. It had a cab on it that his dad had made from wooden bomb cases.
Yeah.
And it was, he said, don't look at the stereo, which was a joke because there wasn't. Right. It was very basic. That's the one you loved. And there were a couple of others as well, a little grey fur.
I saw it. I watched it. Yeah.
So it was wonderful, wasn't it? Just, I mean, obviously entranced you. And absolutely. I just want to connect people with the countryside and let them on a Sunday morning soak up the countryside and the people who work in it.
Now, you also had on as your guest, and I thought he was terrific, was Brian Connolly, who is indeed Mr. Show Business. I know him, not properly, but I know him because I've actually played in his backing band, and I actually played in the Global, on the roof of Global, and we're going to talk about Global and your connection to them in a moment. So I've actually played for Brian Connolly as part of his backing band.
I'm hugely impressed by the instruments that surround you, Maurice, and the photographs on the back wall. I'm trying to work out because I can see the photo on the back wall. And there's a piece of paper underneath it, and I can't work out what that is.
Oh, the piece of paper. Okay, I had the great pleasure and privilege to interview one of my absolute heroes. It's Marty Wilde.
Good Lord.
And that's a picture of Marty, a signed picture of Marty. And he sent me as a gift a plectrum that he had used on stage. And when I got it, it was sealed on the piece of paper. I could not bring myself to take it off and use it because the great man has used it, and there's no way that I was going to touch it. So I had it framed with the picture.
But Brian is an absolutely lovely man. They're very good on Love Your Weekend. I have a great producer, great editor, Rachel, who runs every guest past me before she books them. And there are one or two people who can be a bit hard work, you know, and I tend to avoid them because I think, well, it's Sunday morning. We don't need people who are hard work. And this last week, I've been talking to Julian Fellows and, you know, there's just loads and loads of names who are good conversationalists. Jimmy Doherty from Jimmy's Farm, he was on with Julian, which was a wonderful combination. Bringing people together who are sort of odd bedfellows, ostensibly, you can often find great common ground between them. And I love doing that. And then at the end of every program, we have this, we sample British. Well, it used to be drinks and food. The food seems to have sort of gone by the by because we do drinks and then we always have a couple of non-alcoholic drinks. But I'll let you into a secret. Every television station has a department called compliance. I'll check nobody's listening. And compliance are there to make sure that you don't promote a brand or well, if you're talking about different wines, you have to say what they're called, but they don't really like us doing alcohol because it's a bit irresponsible. And we're all grown up. Yes, some people have problems with this and problems with that, but we do a couple of alcohols. And when we sample these wines, well, it's become an absolute hit of the show. And I've got so many friends, generally older people, who say, I love the bit at the end, and I keep trying to write the names down of the wines. All British. So we're very much supporting British stuff. And that's become quite fun as well. But yeah, Brian is such a lovely guy, who, funnily enough, doesn't drink. So he liked the non-alcoholic ones. But you just want people on who are going to entertain. They're there to entertain.
Well, speaking of entertaining, you also were involved with there's a program called the Antiques Roadshow, the 20th Century Roadshow, and I love the program. Can you recall, was there anything that seemed like an unlikely object that the experts judged to be collectible that perhaps you didn't think would be?
Well, I've long since ceased to be amazed by the collectability of anything. I mean, Barbie dolls, dinky toys, whatever you've collected in the past, if it's in mint condition, somebody will want it. And it was wonderful doing that. It was called 20th Century Roadshow. Right. And we did it suffered from being commissioned by one channel controller and inherited by another. And that's an unfortunate state of affairs often because somebody says, I want this program, then they move on and somebody else gets it and they don't really notice it and they move it around and it just, they forget to recommission it and off it goes. So we only did one series, but it was a sort of spin-off from the Antiques Roadshow. And it was great fun to do, but who knows?
I've got to say, it was very, very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I believe you also did one that was filmed at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford.
We did with these amazing old aircraft, that's astonishing. And I think it's, they say youth is wasted on the young. And I think the older you get, the more interested you become in history because you see where you've come from. And without realizing it, you see what you're made of and what has influenced you, often subliminally. And I think that's one of the things that we need to remember today with a lot of, we dare use the phrase cancel culture and, the toppling of statues and things. Well, they're there not only as a celebration of a life, but also as a reminder. And often they become a warning of what not to do. And if they disappear, then the warning is lost. How do you learn from the past if you've erased it? And Nelson Mandela said that. So I'm in good company.
Yeah. Well, that is a fantastic place. Now, there is something that I am totally and utterly in awe and envious of, and that is that you have flown in a Spitfire.
I have. Amazing.
I'd love to do that. I've actually been in the Spitfire, but not up in the air.
I wasn't allowed in it on my own, you'll be pleased to know. There's a wonderful dual control one called the Grace Spitfire, which is owned and run by Carolyn Grace, whose husband built it and then was tragically killed, and Carolyn decided she'd take it on herself. And I opened the Southampton Boat Show and they said, would you like to fly in the Spitfire? But I didn't need long to think, like before they'd finished asking, I said, no. So we took off from Southampton Airport. We flew over the Isle of Wight on a glorious clear day, and the water was turquoise. And I remember, and I was sitting there with this joystick. The thing is, you don't sit in a Spitfire, you wear it because you feel it. It's so close to you. It's so tight. Yeah. It's almost a part of your body. The most amazing feeling. And of course, when you're on the ground, you're staring up at an angle of 45 degrees until you actually take off, and then you're going straight. And I remember we were sitting on the tarmac with the engine running for longer than Caroline wanted. And they said, just a couple more minutes. She said, if it's 2 more minutes, we'll catch fire. Oh, right, take off. So we took off because it's air-cooled, and we flew over, and it was wonderful. And Caroline said, do you want to fly it? And I said, can I? And she said, yes. And just hold, and it's a stick. It's not a little wheel. It's a single joystick. And she said, don't yank it. She said, just hold it steadily and feel the aircraft. And she said, would you like to do a roll? And I said, yes. Well, you would say, no, not really, thank you. And yes, I would. She said, don't yank it. She said, think roll. So I looked ahead and I thought roll, and I saw the horizon. Do that. And just by the faintest tweak on the joint, it did a roll, and I righted it. And one of the greatest thrills ever. It was a wonderful thing to do. Yeah.
Well, I'm even more envious now. Sorry. Okay, well, we're going to move on because I know that music is clearly one of your other loves, both as a performer and as a presenter. So where does this interest stem from?
My parents were both musical. My dad sang and my mum played the piano, and I sang from being a boy. My sister learned to play the piano, and when I asked my mother why I wasn't allowed to play on the piano, her answer was very short. She said, you wouldn't have practiced. I thought, oh, well, I quite like the opportunity anyway. I sang in the church choir, and I sang in the operatic society, and I've always loved singing. So, and when right from being in my early teens, when my friends were buying Rolling Stones records, I was buying Mussorgsky and Beethoven.
Don't say because I'm going to come on to that as a separate thing. I want to talk about that.
But yeah, I always loved it. It's just been a part of my life.
Okay. Well, you and I actually, interesting enough, I think we have something in common. In that we both grew up in the 50s, and we both had a Fidelity record player.
Yes.
Now, my very first record that I bought was Conway Twitty and It's Only Make Believe. Can you remember the first record you bought?
Russ Conway, China Tea.
Look at the screen.
Hey. Oh gosh,
there he is, the great man. What one you could do with one finger missing as well.
Yeah, my mother always used to think when he turned to the camera like that and smiled, she was convinced he was smiling at her.
Why not?
I did get to interview him later in life when he was much older, and
really?
and he, of course, his career was really, he'd been overtaken by. We were even after because when I was doing Pebble Mill, I interviewed him at Pebble Mill, so I was interviewing in the late 80s, early 90s, and he turned to camera as he sat at the piano and said, "Let's see if we can get this one into the hit parade." And it was such a sweet thing to say. I mean, clearly there was very little chance of it getting into the hit parade, but the fact that he called it the hit parade was wonderful.
Absolutely, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Now, with music in mind, you had a spell presenting songs of praise. You had a stint on Radio 2 playing a selection of light classical music, and more recently, your love of classical music led you to a Saturday morning show on Classic FM. Now, incidentally, it was through our mutual friend, the great conductor and composer, Debbie Wiseman. And there's a great picture of Debbie there. I'm hoping she's actually in our audience tonight because she wrote some of the musical trails for you and for Global. And I had the great pleasure of interviewing her for Youth Aliyah a little bit earlier in the year. Wonderful character, brilliant musician, a real delight to know.
She is astonishingly talented, and said to me, we met ages ago, and she said, and I knew her work, you knew things that she'd written, and I still love her theme tune for Father Brown, which I tease her about sometimes. And she said, you know, I ought to write you a theme tune. And I said, I'd love a theme tune. The trouble is they don't do theme tunes for folk like me anymore. But we kept in touch and we got to know one another as friends. And then she then said, you write poems, don't you? So I said, well, yes, I do. And she said, you know, my line is that I've always been compared to Wordsworth, but always unfavorably. And she said, why don't you write some poems about plants and flowers and trees and things? And I'll do a musical movement for each one. I thought, crumbs. So I did. We talked about, I sent her a list of things I might like to write about. She picked out the ones that appealed to her, that sort of inspired her. And I wrote the poems. And then Debbie wrote a movement for each one. And we produced, well, Debbie, really, it's all her. Really. I recorded my words, but Debbie, we recorded this CD album with the National Symphony Orchestra called The Glorious Garden, which was Debbie's music and my words. And to be in, I remember the day we recorded it, which was a wonderful thrill. The lovely thing about Debbie is, as well as being enormously talented, she's also extremely good company and very nice to work with. Not remotely prima donna-ish. And sometimes people think that you can't be talented unless you're tricky. Debbie gives the lie to this, absolutely completely wrong. No. But I remember the day I went around there with the head of Classic FM to her house, where she played them all on her sort of enormous, she has this astonishing music studio with so many keyboards and a grand piano and whatnot. And she played them for us, which was wonderful in itself. And then we went to record them at the studio with the National Symphony Orchestra. And I said to Debbie, shall I read the poem before they play each one? And she said, oh, yes, oh, that's nice, go on then. So I stood up and I read the first one, and the orchestras, and it's a bit intimidating because musos can be a bit tricky, you know. And I read it out, and they were quite polite, and then they played the piece. And there's quite a bit of humour in and among some of the movements, Snowdrop and Myrtle and things like that. And as I read them on, they gradually got the drift of this, and they were then hugely appreciative in between each movement. When I came around, gave me a round of applause. But to sit there, that makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end now, just remembering that. And the music is so glorious. Debbie, and I say this without in any way demeaning what she does, she's a great tunesmith. I do love tunes, and some people are quite snooty about tunes. You try writing one that you can remember that's a good tune. And Debbie writes wonderfully complex music, but also music which is pleasing and tuneful. And I love Myrtle and Snowdrop and the English Oak, and Water Lily was another glorious one. And we have sworn that we want to do something else together. And it's just a case of finding what we can do. We both want to write we want to write a musical together, but you know, we'll see how we get on.
I'm sure you will.
But it's
you've also worked with Mylene Klass, haven't you? Because you put a series together about called Pop Star to Opera Star. Was that fun?
It was enormous fun. It was, they call it shiny floor television, which is sort of light entertainment, peak time viewing with a shiny floor, big doors open with smoke. And she and I went through and watched pop stars trying to sing opera, which was brilliant. I mean, and there were some really incredibly gifted performers. I remember Marcella Detroit singing Queen of the Night, which was amazing. And then we have judges like Meatloaf, which is quite funny. So Mylene, for a while when we were doing that, used to call me her TV husband, which is very kind because I was really her TV dad. But we worked together well. We both work for Classic FM, so we bump into each other now and again.
Indeed. Well, speaking still on the subject of music, and talking about operas and shows, but in your 20s, you joined a local operatic society. You mentioned that earlier, and you played the part of Buggins in Half a Sixpence. This is not you, but it's the original London recording, cast recording.
Gosh, yes, yeah. I did. I met my wife in that.
Yes, I was going to say you met somebody very important. Yeah.
Oh, there she is.
Yeah.
We're still together.
That's a lovely picture there of you and Alison.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, to ask about Alison, how does she feel about being married to someone who has regularly been voted one of the world's sexiest men?
Sanguine. It's they always say, was it no man's a hero to his valet? I don't know. I think we're both rather bemused by it, but if I've got away with it, That's as much as I can say. It's always a danger when you start believing your publicity. But that was some years ago. I did once come second to George Clooney.
Yes, I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, Maurice, it's a few years ago
yeah,
now. You know, I've probably gone off.
What other productions have you been in?
Oh gosh, I played Coco in The Mikado and Sir Joseph Porter in HMS Pinafore and Fiedka in Fiddler on the Roof, all kinds of things.
You've also played quite a substantial religious leader.
Oh, well, that was quite funny because I became, the operatic society that we were both in, I'm still associated with, but I don't act with them anymore, but I am now their patron. And every other year they go to Minack, the open air theatre in Cornwall. And a couple of years ago they did Sister Act. And at the end of Sister Act, the Pope appears, and there's a little tiny box and pulpit kind of thing in the Minack Theatre in Cornwall. And I was asked a couple of the nights there to play the Pope. So yes, I played the Pope. We didn't tell anybody, but you could sort of see people's necks craning, thinking, "God, you know who he looks like." So yes, I played the Pope. And I see it's my Wikipedia entry is notoriously inaccurate, but that part of it is accurate. I did play the Pope in Cornwall.
Well, you occasionally also do voiceover work for some adverts. And I think at one point you actually did the voice for Gordon the Gnome on CBeebies.
Yes, that was a children's.
Yes. Now I want to know: is there a certain resemblance in Gordon's features to yours?
I don't think my beard, if I grew it, would be quite as white. It would have quite a lot of white in it, but it would.
That's not Papa's fur, Flynn.
No, that was sweet doing that. It was a good few years ago now. But Gordon the Garden Gnome, yes, he was a sweetheart with a worm who lived in his hat.
Well, on a more serious note, you've compared the Royal Windsor Diamond Jubilee pageant, the Queen's 90th birthday celebration, and you presented several documentaries about the royal family. Now, how much preparation do you personally do for these?
Well, a lot. I mean, you want to know your subject because you always want to know a bit more than you're going to be called upon, hopefully, to emote. So I've met every member of the royal family, so I know some of them better than others. So yes, you do your homework. You rely a lot on your own knowledge, obviously. But it's been lovely actually working again with Debbie on the pageants at Windsor, because Debbie's done the music for them. And I don't think it's a secret anymore. We've both been lined up to do the Platinum Jubilee this coming May. So that's an exciting thing to look forward to. To work with people you rate and respect and who are good fun to work with. Something like that is, you do have to pinch yourself and think, crumbs, don't muck it up. Get it right.
Well, on the subject of the royals, I believe you've been fortunate to have met the Queen now on several occasions, and we have a lovely image here of you receiving your MBE for services to horticulture and broadcasting. Now, I have a question for you, Mr. Titchmarsh. Is it true that the Queen remarked that you give a lot of ladies a lot of pleasure?
Well, she did, but what I think it was referring to was that that was in June. I went for my investiture. The MBE was given to me in the New Year Honours List in 2000, and the investiture was in July. But in January 2000, I addressed the Sandringham Women's Institute, and the Queen was in the front row. And I do sort of an evening with, and so I sort of tempered it for the Sandringham WIAGM. And when the Queen's sitting in the front row, it's a bit nerve-wracking, but she threw her head back and laughed on so many occasions. It was lovely. She was a really good audience. And she said to me when she shook my hand at the end of pinning the medal on me, she said, "You give a lot of ladies a lot of pleasure." And it was obviously, I think, referring to that Sandringham WIAGM, but it was sort of reporting, because there's a reporter sitting on a kind of banquette at the side. And although the conversations I've had with the Queen subsequent to that, I've never told anybody what they were because they're private, but that's obviously public, and he's sitting there with a notebook accredited, so you're allowed to tell him what she said. And it didn't really occur to me what she said until I told him, and he said, "She said what?" So yes, she did.
Well, you mentioned already that you have regularly actually been voted one of the world's sexiest men.
Have I? I've never seen those votes myself.
Well, blame Wikipedia, but
Oh, right.
out there. And in first place was a certain Mr. George Clooney.
Mm.
You have been voted second to George Clooney.
Who was third?
Oh, please, please, not in front of the public. It's not fair.
Well, I think it can only have been in the home for the hard of seeing, you know, the short-sighted. I don't know. I'm very flattered, but I don't have to believe it.
Well, you're clearly a firm believer in variety being the spice of life. Is there one aspect of your career to date that you have, say, you've enjoyed the most?
I like the variety, and I like the contrast between the sociability of broadcasting and the solitude of writing. I mean, when I'm writing, I sit here on my own, no music, just the ticking of clocks, nothing else. That's it. And I enjoy that solitude and the solitude I get in my garden. But then I like going out and being with people and making something together, whether it's music with Debbie or it's television programs with my team at Love Your Garden and Love Your Weekend. I like people, and as long as they're prepared to get on, I avoid confrontation because I don't think it's necessary. I like people who are determined to do a good job, but who will work with you and we can work together. There's enough that goes wrong in broadcasting technically without temperament creeping in. And I think sometimes temperament is confused with perfectionism. You can be a perfectionist and still not be tricky. And it just gets in the way for me. And I like working with people to make something entertaining and informative. And that's when it's at its best. And I think you can do that. People who, you know, lose their rag, it's often at their own shortcomings and they're trying to cover that up. Well, we all have shortcomings. You might just well let them out, let people know and say, sorry about that, you know, and get on with it. And if you find out what you like doing, which is often what you're good at, and you're often good at what you like doing, just do that. Why do something that you don't like with people it works? Life's too short and you eat yourself away from inside. No, I'm not into that.
Well, Alan Titchmarsh, MBE, national treasure, garden and music guru, tonight has been an absolute pleasure and delight getting to know more about you and your wonderful career. Thank you so much for being our guest. Just before I hand over to Dahlia, because we've got some questions which I hope you'll be happy to answer. I want to mention to our audience that you will be presenting the Grand Christmas Classics at the Barbican Hall on Wednesday, 22nd December, which sounds like a great start to the festive season.
And if you're further north, I shall be doing it in Manchester on Monday the 20th. So yes, I did one in Birmingham at Symphony Hall yesterday, yesterday evening. So this is, yeah, there are three. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, great fun.
So, Alan, thank you so very much. I'm going to hand back to Dahlia now and say good evening and so profound thanks to you for being here.
Thank you, Maurice. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Hi, I'm back. Wow. Man of many talents. I think we all learned something new about different aspects of you tonight. So that was amazing. Thank you. We've got lots of questions for you. So let's get stuck right in. Let's see. Phil Diamond, hi Phil, is asking, how did you break into television?
I broke into radio first by when I was at Amateur Gardening. They'd said, you know, I'd said I always fancied doing, you know, radio and TV. I got the job there and I went there and they said, oh, that's a shame because somebody last week from Radio 4 rang up and said, are we anybody who could talk about whatever? And we said no. So I said, who was it? So I dropped them a line and I managed to get some radio. I always say to people, start a hospital radio or local radio or something. Learn your trade where there are not many people listening or watching. Says he who leapt in on Radio 4, but there we are. And so I started on Radio 4 and then Greenfly invaded Margate. And I did a piece on the Today programme, as I then used to do, as well as doing You and Yours, which is still running on Radio 4. I used to do the Today programme on high days and holidays, you know, Good Friday or Christmas Eve, and we had to look after our Christmas tree, you know, that sort of thing. But Greenfly invaded Margate and the Today programme got me on to talk about it. And Nationwide, that evening programme that Maurice mentioned, heard me on Nationwide, on Breakfast, on Today, and said, will you come on this evening and talk about it on television? So my first TV was live in 1979. And they said, wonderful, marvellous, you must come back. So I went home and said, yeah, I've cracked it. They said, wonderful, marvellous, you must come back. Well, a year later, I got another phone call saying somebody's got a roof garden in a block of flats and it collapsed onto the flat below. Will you come onto Nationwide and tell us how to have a roof garden that won't collapse into the flat below? So I said, yes. I went along and I did that. And they said, wonderful, marvellous. And I went home and said, yeah, same again. And then they rang up the following week. So from 1980, I was on every week. And I think I've probably been on television every week since 1980, which is terrible. And that's how it happened. And then I got Breakfast Time. So I was always a gardening expert to start with. And then, as I say, somebody said, have you thought about doing TV other than gardening? And that's when it all sort of took off. Yeah.
Everyone takes interesting roads to get to where we're going.
Yeah, and it's not always the one you think. I remember, forgive the name drop, but I remember Dirk Bogarde, I was interviewing him, and he said too many people go along with a goal, a focus. That's where I'm going, to this metaphorical door. And they get to the door and it's locked and barred and they can't get in. He said there are so many side doors that they've ignored, saying, no, that's where I'm going. And they could have led to the same place via a different route. And I think, the road less traveled, it's always more interesting, isn't it, really?
Definitely. The scenic route.
Yeah.
Definitely. Shelley Speck has a two-part question for you. She asks, what is your proudest achievement? And also, how do you remember all those Latin plant names?
Proudest achievement is, along with my wife, having two daughters who are still speaking to me.
Well
I won't tell you their ages, but they're grown up and they've got children of their own, and we get on very well. And I love that. The fact that I've managed to raise two daughters. Oh, yes, there's been the odd slam door. Every teenager does all that. But they're daughters. They're not my friends, but we have a wonderful relationship. I absolutely adore them both. They've now got to the stage where, you get that tilt in your life where your children start advising you. For instance, I never take on a television program without running it past them. I say, oh, no, Dad, no. Or, oh, that might be quite nice, but it's often no. So I listen to them. So that's my greatest achievement. And what was the other one?
How do you remember the Latin plant names? Well,
the sad thing is that I often find them easier to remember than people's names. If you use them all the time, and I do, plants are the Latin name. It's been my stock in trade since I was 15. I use them all day, every day. Some of them I forget, but not many. Because you use them, you remember them. And it's like people, your nearest and dearest and your intimates, the people you see every day. You remember their names, of course you do. It's just like the same with plants. But there are some that people you haven't seen for years, and you think, hello, you're racking your brains, There's a lovely story about Thomas Beecham, that famous conductor who was in Fortnum and Mason's, and he was walking around, he saw this woman, and he knew her, and he couldn't remember her name. So he tried to dodge, but she met him around jams, and she said, good morning, Sir Thomas. And he said, good morning. She said, how are you? He said, I'm fine. How are you? Trying to remember. She said, I'm very well, thank you. He said, good. He said, how are the family? She said, oh, they're very well, thank you, very well. He said, good. He said, how's your husband? Oh, he's very well indeed. He said, good. He said, what's he doing with himself nowadays? And she said, oh, he's still king. Well, after that, you can't make a worse mistake than that, can you, really? It was Queen Mother,
Awkward. A little awkward. Yeah. Shall we go to the next question? This is anonymous, who's asking, I always watch Love Your Weekend. What are the favorite things people have brought for you for your barn?
Oh, I think it's the animals as much as anything you remember. These pygmy goats on a couple of weeks ago, and they were just I've got piglets coming on in a week or two's time, and they fall asleep on your lap.
Oh.
And of course, it's television. You're thinking, I hope there's nothing left on my lap when I get up, And so far, there hasn't been. But it's just people who will talk, and we have regular contributors like Tom Davis from Mudshoot Farm in London, who's the most eloquent farmer who can talk in detail about sheep, pigs, cows, whatever, interestingly. And I enjoy it all. And it's only 20 minutes from where I live, which is my wife and I found the barn. It's not our barn,
Yeah.
but it's just about 20 minutes down the road. It's another village with a lovely couple who own this little farmhouse and then the barn, the thatched barn, which we've just rethatched, which has been wonderful to do, and a couple of paddocks and a garden. It's the perfect location. So the fact that I don't have to travel to Manchester or Birmingham or whatever, or miles away and stay away overnight, my ripe old age, where I like my own bed now, it's wonderful to go there for a day, talk to lovely people, some of them celebs, most of them not, meet animals, ask questions about animals. It's lovely, and I think that's catching on. Funny fact, I heard this morning that yesterday's program, there are various phrases they use in television, but yesterday we won the slot. More people watched our program than watched BBC One or Channel 4, where they've got established programs like Sunday Brunch and things like that. Well, we wiped the floor with them yesterday, and we're only in our second series. We ran from September to April last year. We came on again in September. It takes people time to realize you're back. Well, they realized yesterday that we were back, and more people watched us than anything else. And not from an egotistical point of view, it's just nice to know that people have found this program, which celebrates everything that I think is great about the British countryside.
Oh, so was it the piglets or was it the goats that won the slot?
It was, yes, and I didn't watch it yesterday. I can't remember what animals we had on. We had the tractors. So because I record several at a time, and I didn't watch yesterday, apart from the tractors, which Maurice told me were on yesterday, I can't remember which animals we had yesterday. So, yeah. I know the goats were on a couple of weeks ago.
Have you seen, talking of pygmy goats, this is a total tangent, have you seen the fainting goats?
No.
There are pygmy goats that when they get startled, they have a...
Keel over.
They do, they just fall over.
Oh, wonderful.
Very cute. They're all over YouTube. You should definitely do a search.
Okay, I'll look at the fainting goats.
Yeah, you'll have to. They're very funny. Okay. Maureen and Stuart want to know, has anyone whose garden you've transformed told you after the broadcast that they really didn't like it?
No, I'm glad to say. Well, going way back to Ground Force, do you remember it was on at the same time as changing rooms? And honestly, when in Bowen, used to love painting rooms purple, especially if the people had said they hated purple. And changing rooms was different to Ground Force. We just used to, and it's the same with Love Your Garden. We work so hard to find out what is their dream. We do a lot of research. So it sounds a bit Pollyannaish and twee, but no, because we do our homework. We want to give them the garden of their dreams, not a nightmare. And also, if they're old or infirm and not capable of looking after it, we have to give them a garden they can manage. So no, we've got it right because we've done the homework. And I'm not interested in just, doing something for sort of notoriety. I want them to have a garden that they love.
Good for you. Right, talking of gardens that we love. So this is a question from me. I love growing vegetables in my garden. I love it. It makes me so happy to say, oh, what should we have for dinner tonight? Let's see what's ripe. Slugs. Talk to me about slugs, because I try not to put toxins into the earth, and try and keep things as natural and as organic as possible. But the slugs keep eating everything, especially my brassicas.
I think the thing to do is to try and get the brassicas to a decent size before you plant them out. Make sure the soil is really well enriched so they grow fast. Don't let them go short of water. And you can get copper collars, clerical collars, vicar's collars. You can get them made of copper. And if you put those round the plants, they don't like crossing it. It apparently gives them some kind of electric shock. Try those. Once they're away, you're always going to get a bit of slug damage on the outer leaves, but hopefully not on the inside. And the thing with the brassicas is, as long as it can be stripped off, the slug damage, to relieve, in terms of cabbages, a solid heart, and a bit on the leaves of a cauliflower, but not on the curd in the middle. You got to live with it. But I'm the same as you. I'm organic, so I don't use slug pellets or anything like that. But I still manage to grow brassicas. Grow them well, and the key with all vegetables is, one, don't sow or plant them too early when it's too cold, because they'll sit and they'll wait. Plant them a little bit later when you know they're going to romp away. Don't let them go short of water. I don't mean grow them in a paddy field, but don't let them go thirsty. And then they'll be away, and they will then outstrip, in terms of their growth, the predations of the slugs. You'll always have a bit on them, but not enough to ruin the crop.
Are those wool pellets any good?
They do. They seem to work. Yeah, when they form a barrier around them. Yeah, I mean, I've heard good reports of those. I've only used them once a few years ago, and they were quite good. Yeah,
okay. Okay, fingers crossed for next summer then. Thank you. We have another question asking about climate change. It's good that you just talked about being organic. Climate change and gardening, how do the two interact with each other? Where do they meet?
The one is at the mercy of the other, and we have to cope. But I've never been one of those chickens with its head cut off running around saying, oh my God, the sky's falling, what are we going to do? And as I said earlier, look after that piece outside your house. Be a responsible grower, a responsible gardener, a responsible custodian and steward of your piece of earth, however small. You know all the don't do's, because we're always told what we mustn't do. But at the same time, there's a perversity in block paving your front garden in order to have an electric car there that you can charge. But so many people do it.
Yeah.
And they get rid of a piece of ground which absorbs water and avoids surface flooding, which is a carbon capture, which is responsible, attracts insects and wildlife, with block paving so they can plug in an electric car to be kind to the environment. Consequences, think it through, and then you try and find a kind of truce with nature.
So what are the top 3 do's?
Be kind to your soil. You're responsible for it. Don't use chemicals. There's no need. You're not feeding the third world. You're feeding yourself, and you're trying to grow decent crops yourself. So it's kind to your soil. Don't start banning chemicals. Don't use peat-based compost. There are plenty of multi-purpose compost out now. We don't need to demolish our peatlands any more than we have at the moment. And grow what you love growing, remembering that single flowers will attract pollinators more than double flowers will. But it's all about balance. You do not have to rewild your plot to be kind to nature. Insects are remarkably adaptable. They will come to the plants that you're growing if you don't put them off by everything else that you're putting on there. And I think to suggest that everybody should let their garden lie fallow, you don't need to do that. You can enjoy cultivating. My heart sank the other day when a large organization, I won't mention its name, said everybody should be growing just fungi and mosses and weeds. Oh, push off. It's not going to make, that will not make a difference. Just grow something, not block paving. And that's the answer.
Yeah.
And don't forget, the answer lies in the soil.
Always, always.
Amazing. Well, that sounds to me like an excellent place to stop and to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure learning a bit more about you and also learning from you. I know that my garden will do better next year thanks to you, and also thanks to you, the children that we take care of in Israel will do better and will give back to their communities. Just so that you know, all of our youth villages do have agricultural programs. So kids who have difficulties in a traditional classroom have the opportunity to learn outdoors, getting their hands dirty, growing food, feeding their own communities. It's such an important part of life and a way to engage again with a community, with your own community, with the earth. We've sort of come full circle. So thank you for helping us to help them, which in turn helps all of us.
My pleasure, Dahlia. Thank you for asking me. And yes, you're right. That connection with children and the earth, it just needs to be fostered and encouraged. We need to hand over our little patch of earth in a good condition to them, and then we've given them a decent legacy. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to say a few more thank you, especially thank you to Morris for, as always, doing incredible research and conducting a lovely interview. Thank you, Morris. And to Marsha for being there behind the scenes always. Thank you. And to the rest of the committee, and to the team at Youth Aliyah Child Rescue, our trustees, and Deborah in the office. Thank you. A couple of ways that you can help us to keep doing our good work is to, of course, if you can support us financially, we always appreciate donations. The money will go straight to the children, and setting up programs for them. Right now, one of the programs that we've just recently launched is there's an organic bakery at Alonei Yitzchak, where the children are learning from a professional baker how to bake organic breads, which are then used to feed their own community, the children of the village. And so they're going into the world with a skill, whether they use it professionally or in their own homes to feed their own families. It's an amazing skill that I think we'd all do well to learn. Please, if you want to volunteer with us, an amazing way to help would be to let your friends know about these events that we're holding, to invite them to come along. January is the month that is home to Holocaust Memorial Day. And in recognition of that, we've got two really, really amazing events planned. We are speaking to Eva Schloss, who is herself a Holocaust survivor and is now a Holocaust educator. She's also the stepsister of Anne Frank. And so she is going to be talking to us about her life during the Holocaust, before, and of course since. And then we're also going to be speaking to international best-selling author Heather Morris, who wrote The Tattooist of Auschwitz and has now just published a subsequent book called Three Sisters, about three girls who went to Auschwitz and who survived the Holocaust together. So that will be also incredible. So go to our website, get those tickets. The Eva Schloss event is free of charge because we want as many people as possible to hear the stories of survivors. Heather Morris is only £5. If you can get people to join us, we would love it. If you'd like to join us again, please do, Alan. We will happily send you invitations as our guest to both, if you can make it. I'm sure they'll both be really interesting. That's it for us. Thank you all so much. I'm going to say good night to you all now. Thank you for joining us, and take good care.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.